Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth sharing. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today, I will interpret The Crowd for you, taking over 20 minutes to delve into the essence of the book. Once people form a group, their unique psychological characteristics and their impact on our society and lives become apparent. Speaking of The Crowd, it is a renowned book, also known as The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. It is considered a classic and essential read in the field of social psychology. Before this book, people had a rather vague and shallow understanding of the concept of crowds. The book's greatest achievement lies in its pioneering definition of the crowd concept and its systematic analysis of the psychological characteristics of crowds. Subsequently, the study of crowds gained increasing attention and became an important research direction in social psychology. It's not an exaggeration to say that all the theories, schools of thought, and methods related to the study of crowd psychology and crowd behavior that we see and hear today have their roots in this book. The book proposes that when people share similar psychological appeals, they have the potential to form a crowd. Once individuals become part of a crowd, their intelligence declines, and psychological traits like impulsiveness and increased self-confidence emerge. Leaders within a crowd must be unwavering individuals capable of making assertions. Through repeated assertions and emotional contagion, they can mobilize and guide the crowd. The author of this book is Gustave Le Bon, a Frenchman. The Crowd was completed and published in 1895, making it 122 years old as of today. Interestingly, Gustave Le Bon was a medical doctor by profession, but his personal interests extended to a wide range of research areas, including anthropology, sociology, social psychology, and natural sciences. The Crowd is, in fact, the result of Le Bon's amateur research. At the time, the professional academic institutions in France did not take him seriously or provide much support. However, Le Bon persisted in his research and, relying on his own efforts, eventually produced these groundbreaking research results that challenged conventional wisdom. After the release of The Crowd, it created an entirely new field of study, the psychology of crowds. Throughout the book, there are many fascinating anecdotes and insights that shine with wisdom. Although many people have doubted and criticized Le Bon's work, claiming it lacked rigor and relied on personal conjecture instead of rigorous academic evidence, his conclusions about crowd psychology in this book have been repeatedly confirmed by historical events that followed. In this sense, some jokingly say that Le Bon's predictions eventually proved to be true, making him a successful prophet. Now, let me introduce the key contents of the book to you, which can be summarized into 4 main points. 1. How Le Bon defines the concept of a crowd. 2. The psychological characteristics that Le Bon believes crowds possess. 3. How crowds are formed and develop. 4. How leaders within a crowd mobilize and guide it. Alright, let's start by examining the first key point: how does Le Bon define a crowd? In other words, in his view, what kind of people can be considered the crowd? Le Bon makes it clear that not just any large gathering of people constitutes a crowd. For example, a crowd passing through or strolling in a square may be numerous, but it doesn't qualify as a crowd. It is only when this group of people shares a psychological consistency, meaning they have a common psychological appeal, that they can be considered a crowd. What does this mean? Let's continue with the example of the people in the square. Although they are all present in the same place at the same time, they each have their own points of focus and lack a unified psychological appeal among themselves. Therefore, in this situation, they do not fit Le Bon's definition of a crowd. However, if suddenly an earthquake occurs, and someone shouts, "Earthquake! Run to the open area," the crowd in the square starts to panic and run. In this case, the situation changes. They all share a unified psychological response of self-preservation and the need to take action to protect themselves. In an instant, these people become what Le Bon defines as a crowd. Le Bon also emphasizes that a crowd doesn't necessarily have to gather at the same time and place. Once a psychological consistency forms, individuals spread across various corners of society, with different backgrounds and who may not even know each other, can still become a crowd, exhibiting the unique characteristics of a crowd. A typical example of this might be investors in the stock market. People from various backgrounds and locations engage in stock trading. Most of them do not know each other personally, but they all share the common hope of making a fortune through buying and selling stocks. Therefore, they fall under Le Bon's definition of a crowd. Although Le Bon does not explicitly define this in the book, it's worth noting that highly organized groups, such as military personnel, employees of a company, or students in school, do not fall into this category. These highly organized groups follow established rules, are subject to strict management, and act according to clear commands. They do not exhibit the psychological characteristics of a crowd as proposed by Le Bon. So, that covers the first key point of this book, what Le Bon defines as a crowd. Now, let's move on to the second key point of this book, the psychological characteristics that Le Bon believes crowds possess. In other words, what sets the behavior of people in crowds apart from individuals? Le Bon summarizes 3 psychological characteristics of crowds in this book. The first is a decrease in intelligence. When many individuals come together to form a crowd, does their collective intelligence surpass the sum of their individual intelligence? Does it make them collectively smarter? According to Le Bon, quite the opposite is true. He believes that the intelligence of a crowd is lower than the average intelligence of its individual members. When a group of people gathers, their collective thinking tends to exhibit irrational simplification, a lack of common sense, and logical reasoning. Due to this decrease in intelligence within the crowd, Le Bon provides various examples, such as crowds being more inclined to accept simple calls to action without concern for evidence or reasoning. They tend to avoid analysis and judgment, and simplistic appeals that cater to people's basic needs are more likely to gain the support of the crowd. Because of this decrease in intelligence within a crowd, they are particularly susceptible to suggestion, readily believe and spread absurd rumors, and embrace various bizarre ideas. The second psychological characteristic of crowds, as summarized by Le Bon, is an inflated sense of self-confidence and daring. As individual entities, people might only think about daring acts without taking action, or they may not even dare to think about them at all. However, when these individuals come together to form a crowd, they not only dare to think but also dare to act. They may even feel a sense of lawlessness. This psychological feature of crowds is based on 2 reasons. Firstly, the sheer size and collective strength of the crowd make individuals believe that they can easily achieve goals that would be impossible for them as individuals. Secondly, once individuals become part of a crowd, their fear of punishment is diminished or eliminated. In other words, they feel that they are not personally responsible for their actions because they are acting as part of the crowd. This concept is often expressed as, the mob doesn't have a conscience. The third psychological characteristic of crowds is their emotionalism and readiness for action. The formation and development of crowds are driven by emotional contagion. Crowds are always spurred by emotions, and more intense emotions are more likely to become the dominant force. Under the influence of increasingly intense emotions, crowds tend to take immediate action rather than engaging in verbal debate. Therefore, once people gather into a crowd, they can be likened to a powder keg, where a spark can set off an explosion. So, these are the crowd psychology characteristics outlined by Le Bon: reduced intelligence, increased self-confidence, and emotionalism. Le Bon's emphasis on these crowd psychology traits was greatly influenced by the era in which he lived. The French Revolution and Napoleonic era brought about radical changes in French society, toppling traditional feudal monarchy and religious authority from their sacred status. The power of the masses had erupted dramatically. Mass movements and street protests, whether in politics or fashion, began to shape society significantly. Observing the rise of this kind of mass power, Le Bon became deeply concerned. He foresaw that in the future, this collective of ordinary people would play a dominant role in society. Le Bon's focused study of crowd psychology and behavior was an attempt to make predictions about future societal developments. The psychological traits he identified, such as irrationality, impulsiveness, and daring, led him to adopt a pessimistic view of the future of society. So, that covers the second key point of the book: the psychological characteristics as perceived by Le Bon within crowds: lowered intelligence, increased self-confidence, and emotionalism. Now, let's proceed to the third key point of the book. How are these masses, these crowds, actually formed, and how do they evolve? Le Bon believes that the formation of crowds is influenced by both indirect and direct factors. Indirect factors refer to the long-term permeation of certain ideas and thoughts, resulting in gradual changes in people's thinking over an extended period. An example Le Bon provides is the brewing of the French Revolution. In France at the time, political ideals such as freedom and equality had been disseminated for over a century, gradually being accepted by various societal classes. This laid the groundwork for the sudden outbreak of the French Revolution, as these long-established ideas had prepared society's mindset for significant change. On the other hand, direct factors are events that trigger the emotions of a crowd, often referred to as spark events. Once ignited, these spark events unify people from different walks of life and locations across society, creating a shared emotional response. This emotional cohesion, with its newfound psychological consistency, allows the crowd to be swiftly mobilized under the leadership of a crowd leader and eventually lead to large-scale actions. For instance, a landmark event during the French Revolution, where numerous prisons were attacked, can be seen as such a spark event. It instantaneously aroused a revolutionary spirit among the French populace and quickly evolved into a massive mass movement, ultimately overthrowing the monarchy. However, what's intriguing is that initially, crowds are often driven by a straightforward slogan, and their pursued goals appear clear. Yet, because these slogans lack precise definitions, the results the crowd ultimately achieves often deviate from their initial intentions. Crowd actions are directed towards a clear goal, but they frequently veer off course in practice. For instance, during the French Revolution, the masses initially aimed to overthrow the feudal rule of the Bourbon dynasty and establish democratic freedoms. However, before long, they enthusiastically supported Napoleon Bonaparte, who became a dictator. Similarly, consider sports fans gathering to watch a game. Their initial goal is to see their favorite team win. However, after the game, the fans often form opposing groups, leading to physical confrontations. At this point, the outcome of the game becomes less important, as the focus shifts to the fans' interactions. Despite Le Bon's critical and skeptical perspective on the crowds he observed and studied, he objectively points out that crowd behavior cannot be simply judged as good or bad. A mobilized crowd, in one moment, might engage in bloody conflicts over trivial matters. Yet, in the next moment, the same crowd may selflessly devote itself to protecting a child. Therefore, it is crucial to understand that crowd characteristics are not inherently positive or negative. The key factor lies in the leadership guiding the crowd's direction. So, what I've discussed here is the formation and development of crowds, influenced by the long-term permeation of indirect factors and the sudden ignition of direct factors. Now, I'll explain the final key point, which is a fascinating phenomenon within crowds, the crowd leaders. Le Bon posits that there are two types of leaders within a crowd, short-term leaders and long-term leaders. Short-term crowd leaders can lead the crowd in practical actions, and they typically emerge in response to specific situations. Examples include the ringleaders of sports fans, who incite altercations, ordinary heroes who step forward to command disaster relief efforts, and influential social media figures who shape online opinions. These short-term leaders exhibit remarkable characteristics when facing difficulties or emergencies. They are more resolute, passionate, and charismatic than other members of the crowd. Their actions directly influence and inspire the entire group. However, it's essential to note that short-term leaders often lose their leadership aura rapidly once the specific scenario that required their leadership disappears. They quickly revert to being ordinary individuals and may even reveal many weaknesses. For example, sports fans leaders, disaster relief commanders, and online influencers may return to their daily lives as regular people, possibly subject to ridicule or mistreatment. On the other hand, long-term leaders within a crowd are quite different. They are rare but wield significant influence, sometimes even after their departure from the world. Le Bon's example of a long-term leader is Napoleon Bonaparte, whose heroic image remained in the hearts of the French people and grew even more significant after his death. Such profound influence could even elevate his previously obscure and inept nephew to the imperial throne. There are several revered figures like these long-term crowd leaders who are considered almost saintly by their followers, possessing a quasi-religious, miraculous quality. Le Bon believes that extraordinary willpower is a necessary quality for those aspiring to become long-term crowd leaders. These individuals must remain unwavering in their convictions over extended periods, even in the face of adversity and danger. Their determination is the key to sustaining and guiding the crowd over time. Regarding how leaders mobilize the crowd, Le Bon identifies three essential elements: assertion, repetition, and contagion. Leaders must present their ideas as assertive statements, concise and vivid, devoid of the need for evidence or argumentation. These assertions cater to the basic needs of the crowd, whether they are political slogans, religious doctrines, or marketing slogans. However, merely asserting ideas is insufficient to deeply influence people. Therefore, the second element is repetition. The leader must tirelessly repeat the assertions, emphasizing them under various circumstances. Repeated repetition drills the assertion into people's subconscious minds, making them believe it unquestioningly. When suitable conditions arise, people immediately act according to the assertion, bypassing the need for thinking, analysis, or judgment. To further ensure the acceptance of their assertions, leaders rely on the third element, emotional contagion. Leaders use intense emotions to infect their followers and then encourage these followers to spread these emotions to others. By infecting more people with the same emotions, leaders can make them accept the assertions more readily. Fear and anger are two of the most easily exploitable emotions for this purpose. If a particular assertion is propagated within an atmosphere of fear or anger, those who succumb to these emotions will deeply believe in the assertion and act accordingly. I've covered most of the key points from The Crowd for you. Let's briefly summarize. First, we discussed the book's definition of a crowd. Le Bon provided a precise definition of a crowd as not just any gathering of people but a group with a shared psychological consistency, such as rowdy soccer hooligans or stock market speculators. Next, we explored 3 psychological characteristics of crowds that Le Bon identified. These include diminished individual intelligence, heightened confidence, and increased emotional sensitivity and impulsiveness. Then, we delved into the formation and development of crowds, emphasizing the influence of indirect and direct factors. Indirect factors, operating over an extended period, shape the ideological foundation of crowds, while direct factors trigger their rapid formation. Crowds' behavior is deeply influenced by the history and culture of various nations, and from a moral standpoint, crowds themselves aren't inherently good or bad. Instead, they exhibit incredible potential for guidance and impact. Lastly, we discussed the role of leaders within crowds. These leaders must possess exceptional willpower and authority. They effectively mobilize crowd members by presenting assertive claims, repeating them tirelessly, and infecting followers with strong emotions. Le Bon's theory suggests that fear and anger are particularly powerful emotions for influencing crowds. Regarding debates surrounding the book, some scholars argue that Le Bon's conclusions are too extreme and lacking in rigorous reasoning and factual basis. They suggest that his status as an amateur scholar might have contributed to these shortcomings. Additionally, there's speculation that Le Bon may have written the book to test the effectiveness of the crowd leadership techniques he proposed within it. In conclusion, this book, despite enduring criticism, remains a milestone in social psychology and one of the most widely read sociology books among the general public. When reading such classic works in social science, it's crucial to focus on their innovative ideas and perspectives rather than seeking absolute right or wrong. These books provide a thought-provoking framework and viewpoint for considering societal issues. Furthermore, these classic social science texts may not offer specific real-world applications but instead provide a mindset, a perspective, and insights. It's essential to critically evaluate and selectively accept the content. While these works offer valuable insights, combining their theories with personal life and work experiences allows for a more comprehensive understanding of complex issues. Congratulations on completing another book, and thank you for your support and interest. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker Channel audiobook channel, like, and share it with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading, and together, we can create a better future. Thank you, and goodbye.